In this video, we're going to be reviewing my favorite handgun calibers and why they are my favorite. In order to do that, I'm going to be reviewing a chart that I made here. By the way, you can download this chart in the notes section as well from this video. But what you're going to see here are a number of the most common pistol calibers that are in use today, or cartridges, if you will. And you're going to see a number of things here. First off, I have them listed on the left-hand side. At the top, you're also going to see the relative grain or the weight of the bullet and their performance, both from an energy as well as a velocity perspective. You're also going to see how each round is developed with a maximum pressure or pounds per square inch defined by the SAMI standards. And this is where a lot of people, when they get into shooting, get a little confused when they first see the size, for example, of a bullet. The size of the bullet is not indicative of the performance of the bullet itself because of the maximum loading pressures that each one of these rounds is designed to provide performance-wise. And we'll go through that in the chart as well here. So for example, one of the biggest contrasts you'll see is between, for example, the old 45 Colt as well as the, for example, the 44 Remington Magnum that has pressure ranges of almost 3 times the amount of the 45 Colt. So even though they look similar in size, the performance is significantly different between the two. So looking at the various loads here, first I'm going to cover the ones that you will commonly see, and then I'm going to cover the 3 that I think are the best pistol cartridges, at least for me, and why I'm going to do that. So the first one to start out with is the 35 AC or the 380 ACP, which is again a relatively low pressure round, relatively smaller, and it shoots a smaller grain bullet, typically in velocities of around 1,200 feet per second on the plus P capacity at 288 foot-pounds. By the way, when you see a plus P designation on a load, it basically means that it has a typical increase in pressure of about 10% over a standard pressure of the load. Because of that, the 380 ACP, you're going to see these carried a lot within small concealed carry type pistols with very little recoil, oftentimes for very short range shooting. So these are kind of one of your fire and flee type cartridges that have been popular for a long time in a very concealable and tight arrangement. But the performance is the give up on this round. Moving to the next round is the 40 Smith Wesson. The 40 Smith Wesson originally had its lineage as the 10 millimeter, but was eventually cut down to accommodate for the lighter loads that the 10 millimeter used to produce for the FBI. So as a result of that, they actually cut down the 10 millimeter cartridge and allowed it to then fit into a medium frame semi-automatic pistol. And as you can see here, the performance of the 40 Smith & Wesson is marginally better than the 9mm that it replaced way back when. However, over time, what we've seen, and we'll talk about this in a moment, is the increased performance of the 9mm. People are now, especially the police departments, are moving away from the 40 Smith & Wesson again and back to the 9mm for a number of the reasons I'll talk about. But the main drawback with the 40 Smith & Wesson is simply the fact that it is a snappier round to fire, and it is in between that category of a 2-legged predator and a 4-legged predator, where the performance scores of the police departments that deployed the 40 Smith & Wesson actually had poorer performance overall in shooting and follow-up and accuracy from the 40 Smith & Wesson than they did the 9mm. Moving down the chart, you now have the 357 SIG, which you will see a lot less of, but it does exist. The 357 SIG was originally designed as a high-pressure cartridge round to ultimately try to replace the rimmed 357 Magnum cartridge in the 124 grain variant, which it comes pretty close to doing depending upon who the loads are and what you're utilizing it for. Most of the numbers that you'll see listed here, for example, are from Underwood ammo. I do have a couple other ammo types I have on here, but I tend to use the hotter loads in my pistols because to me they're all underpowered to begin with. So that's where you're going to see a lot of these numbers coming from here. But the 357 SIG, as you can see here, a lot of people really like this round because it is a high performing, it's got a high energy, high velocity performance out of the load. But the challenge with that becomes cost. Since the 357 SIG is not really widely adopted and utilized by a lot of people, it's very hard to find affordable ways to shoot the 357 SIG on average, to be able to find cheap rounds compared to, for example, the 9mm. So therefore, the amount of utilization use of the 357 SIG is somewhat limited, but the people that like it because clearly it has a lot of stopping power, essentially the 357 SIG is similar to a 40 caliber cartridge that has been necked down to a 9mm load, which in this case ideally is the 124 grain load. And that's where you're able to receive these different performance matrix out of a high pressure cartridge like this. Moving up the line, we have the old Trident Rio 45 ACP, which I have listed here. Again, another lower pressure load, both in the ACP as well as the Plus P configuration. This load was originally developed back by John Moses Browning for his 1911 pistol that was originally developed. And the idea behind the 45 ACP was to be able to fire a heavier bullet, ideally a 200 to 230 grain ball round or a full metal jacketed round that has a larger diameter, but firing at a slower velocity, therefore dumping a lot more of its energy into the target, in this case, a two-legged predator. This is why the 45 ACP was so popular for so long and was utilized by the United States as their standard sidearm issue, is because back then, when you had full metal jacketed rounds, the caliber or size of the bullet firing at a relatively lower velocity allowed you to dump more of that energy and therefore have more stopping power on two-legged predators than a lot of the other options that were out there that might, for example, pass through the target, therefore leaving some of the energy out of it. The 45 ACP, of course, is a large, as you can see, relative to the other calibers on the table. So the drawback there is the amount of capacity you could carry on single stack magazines. The 1911s typically are 7 to 8 rounds, as opposed to almost double that now for the 9mm. But it does have a strong following, and clearly from a man stopper perspective, the 45 ACP in any bullet configuration has always been very effective. Now, going way back in time, we have the 45 Long Colt, which was originally developed for the 1873 Colt single action pistols that came out originally in black powder, then with smokeless powder. Of course, the technology of the pistols and the metals used back then were inferior to what they are today. Therefore, a lot of the loads you see in the older rounds, such as the 38 Specials here, as well as the 45 Long Colts, are considerably lower in maximum pressure. And that is so that the pistols can safely shoot them out. So irrespective of the size of the 45 Long Colt, it is deceiving. Even though it can handle a larger diameter bullet, in this case typically a 200 to 250 grain bullet, it does fire them out at very low velocities, similar to the 45 ACP, and also has a similar performance to the 45 ACP as well. Again, very good for short range, as a two-legged man stopper. Again, very effective cartridge, but again, the size itself can take up relative to the performance of other smaller calibers that are on the table today, especially diameter wise, and having to carry this load to get this kind of performance out. And then the final one I have in the chart here is the 44 Remington Magnum. And ironically, it is very similar in size, as you can see, to the 45. However, the performance is vastly different. The amount of energy from a 240 grain before Remington Magnum is over twice that of a 45 Long Colt, as well as the velocity is significantly faster as well. This is why the 44 Magnum has been so popular for so long for people that are out in four-legged predator country, where they're using this for a hunting round or a backup round for dangerous game or larger game, because clearly the energy and performance is significantly higher in this load, and that's why people have loved it for a long time, especially in a rim cartridge for a revolver. However, time has changed, and a lot of the newer pistols that people are shooting today are the rimless cartridges, which is what takes us to some of these loads, as well as the loads I'm going to take you to now, which are my three favorite loads, or the three favorite handgun cartridges that I personally like. And the following are the 9mm. So first off, the 9mm is a high pressure cartridge. It was originally developed as the 9x9 or 19 Parabellum by George Luger back in 1902. By the way, Parabellum is derived from the Latin meaning of if you seek peace, prepare for war. It has become somewhat of a standard NATO round, if you will, and it's now the world's most widely used handgun caliber on the market today. There's been some controversy around the 9mm, which ultimately led to the development decades ago of the 40 Smith & Wesson, because at the time the bullet technology, meaning the hollow points and the performance as well as the powders used in the 9mm, were inferior to what they were today, lending itself to people looking for other options, including the 40 Smith & Wesson. However, since the 40 Smith & Wesson first came out, the technology of the 9mm has increased significantly over that time. In fact, a 2014 FBI ballistics report came out that found that because of the new powders used and the more advanced bullet designs that are out, the newer 9mm in the proper bullet configuration actually delivers similar performance to both the 45 ACP as well as the 40 Smith & Wesson. And it does this at the same time by producing a lower recoil out of the pistols when you fire it, resulting in higher accuracy scores, especially from many of the police departments that fire them today. They also tend to find that the wear on the pistols for the 9mm tends to be a little bit less than some of the other loads, including the 40 Smith & Wesson. You can have typically higher capacities within the magazines as well. Most pistols today, service pistols, you'll find at around a 15 to 17 round capacity. And they're also one of the best parts, especially on the civilian side, is they're very affordable to shoot and practice with. Even though you can get very expensive and high performance loads, it's very easy to find bulk ammunition in the 9mm configuration, be able to shoot them very affordably. And you can see here, for example, the performance of the various grain bullets, but the highest performance tend to be at the 124 grain at 413 feet per second on the plus P loads at 1225 feet per second. The other benefit of the 9mm is the 9mm is easy to chamber in both small concealed carry, standard duty pistols, various different size pistols can carry and accurately fire this cartridge as well. So it's a very versatile from the context of what different frames and platforms that you can fire it out of. And for that reason alone, when it comes to two-legged predators, I find that the 9mm for me is the best two-legged predator handgun cartridge on the market today. Now, moving to revolvers, as you probably have seen, and if you watch my videos, I love revolvers as much as I do semi-automatics, which takes me to the 357 Magnum, which is my favorite revolver caliber. The 357 Magnum was developed back in 1934 by Elmer Keith, and it's a very powerful cartridge. Ironically, it's a little bit longer than the 38 Special because what he was doing was uploading the 38 Specials for higher performance, and found that the way to ensure that we weren't blowing up guns that had the 38 Special, you had to make the cartridges a little bit longer. But the advantage of doing that is you can now download the 357 Magnums to 38 Specials and 38 Special Plus Ps, which gives it a lot of diverse use of the 357 Magnums. And as you've seen from some of my videos, the 357 Magnums can now be loaded all the way down to J-frame revolvers, to L-frame, K-frames, all the various different sizes, making it very diverse in use. It has also been used to kill literally anything, 2- and 4-legged predators on the North American continent. So again, it has a very strong performance history of what it can actually perform for you, both from a personal perspective as well as from a hunting perspective. It was also a standard police carry round for a long time until the semi-automatic replacements came out in the 1980s. What ultimately killed the 357 Magnum was the rimless cartridge, which is needed now for the single and double stack magazines that you would commonly find these other two cartridges in. But it's still very much loved. The 357 Magnum, again, is a special place for me. Very powerful. The one thing you have to be careful of with the 357 Magnum, as the police departments learned a long time ago, is if you fire this indoors, a heated round indoors, it can literally cause permanent ear damage. So a lot of the police departments have like that versatility of being able to have 38s and 38 Specials to be able to fire out of them as well. And as you can see from the performance, the highest performing typically is the 125, or my favorite, the 158 grain, which again, 1500 feet per second, almost close to 800 foot-pounds of energy. Very effective load. I would carry this in either situation very comfortably, and of course I can shoot this very comfortably out of most of my revolvers today. Which takes me to the final round, which is the 10 millimeter. And this, of course, is my favorite round of the three, especially when it comes to four-legged predators. Again, this is another high-pressure round that was developed, and it can shoot typically 150 to up to 220 grain bullets. The highest performance you're going to see here ballistically is from the 158 grain, which, again, similar to the 357 Magnum, sails at about 1,500 feet per second with about 750 foot-pounds of energy. Again, making it very effective. And of course, this is a rimless cartridge, so this works now within semi-automatics as well. The 10 millimeter was first introduced by Jeff Cooper back in 1983 for the Bren 10, originally adopted by the FBI in 1989, and then ultimately the FBI determined, amongst all their people and their shooting scores, that they needed to download or pour less powder into the round, which ultimately led them to cut that down into the 40 Smith & Wesson, which ironically now the FBI is moving back to the 9 millimeter. But the 10 millimeter is still a very effective round, depending upon what you want to use it for, especially in its higher load configuration, similar to what I have here for the Underwood ammo, which is what I prefer to shoot. Some of the advantages you have of the 10 millimeter is because of the diameter being smaller than, for example, the 45 and others. You can carry, for example, high round counts. So you can typically have 15 rounds in a Glock 20 or 10 rounds in a compact Glock 29, which again is significantly more than 6 rounds, for example, of a 44 Magnum or a or 45 Long Colt. It is also effective against four-legged predators. In fact, Denmark's elite naval serious dog sled patrol carry the Glock 20, and they do it because of polar bear attacks. So clearly this is a effective, they feel it's effective, as well as you'll see Ted Nugent a lot carries a Glock 20 as well as a 29 as a backup for his big game hunting. So it's one of the few rimless cartridges out there that is allowed for deer hunting in most states as well. So many people will use a Glock 20, a 6-inch barrel, or the longer Glock 10 millimeter versions. But the idea is ballistically it passes the requirements for an effective deer hunting round as well out of a semi-automatic, which again makes the 10 millimeter very effective and very popular. And in my case, for example, when I go out, for example, in the woods, I will carry even the heavier loads, the 180 and 200 grain loads. Oftentimes I will have a staggered magazine where I will have hollow points staggered with Keith type hard cast bullets as well, just for more effectiveness depending upon what situation you're in. But all in all, of all the calibers that I talked about here today, the three most effective for me, again, for two-legged predators only, is the 9 millimeter. For revolvers, the 357 Magnum. It just gives me so many different options, both up and down caliber, as well as the 10 millimeter, which I think in all is one of the best rounds out there today, especially for four-legged predators and, if need be, for two-legged predators as well. So I hope this gives everybody an understanding as to what the various different calibers are that are out there today, what differentiates them from a pressure perspective, which translates into performance both from a velocity and energy perspective, and why I've ultimately come to the conclusion that these three, the 9mm 357 Magnum and the 10mm, are my favorite, and in my opinion, the three best pistol cartridges out there today. A lot of people, I'm sure, have a lot of comments about this and differ on all these opinions, which is fine. I just wanted to explain the differences on here as well. There's certainly application uses that are different as well. For example, the 45 ACP, if you like to shoot suppressed rounds, it shoots subsonic, typically at 230 grains, including the 147 grain 9mm will typically shoot subsonics as well, depending upon which loads that you shoot, which again makes them very effective. Subsonic, depending upon the conditions, is typically around 1,050 feet or less in velocity, which again lends itself perfectly to the 45 ACP and 230 grain, as well as the 9mm and 147 grain. So as you can see, there's other applications and considerations here as well, but all in all, these are my three that I like to utilize the most, and I hope this helps. If you like this video or you like this this channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.